very nice to meet you all. A few words about myself. I'm co-founder of Tradeshift. I'm CTO of Tradeshift. We kicked off the company 5 years ago, and we've grown to 200 and some employees today. We are in a few different markets, so we are headquartered in San Francisco today, but we started off in Copenhagen. Also recently kicked off a development office in Suzhou in China. So lots of exciting stuff happening, I think. We are a business-to-business company. To sum it up in one line, our ambition is to connect every company in the world. Since I'm working in the business-to-business space, I want to spend a little time talking about what that actually means, because I think it has an impact on API and API design. And I think if you looked at our services, you would find that some of our APIs would maybe not be as simple to understand and use as some of the consumer service APIs that you see. But I think there's some really interesting potential there. So anyway, I'm going to start in a completely different place. In February 2011, where Michael Jensen, an owner of a small sports shop in Denmark, opened a cardboard box of what he expected to be 100 GPS watches for his sports shop, but found some cans of macadamia nuts. At the same time, somewhere in China, the stock of a company called Alibaba dropped dramatically, and they lost what corresponds to around $6 billion in value. What is Alibaba? Just a show of hands, how many of you have heard about the company? That's very nice. I think if I asked maybe before September this year, there had been some fewer hands, but that's good to see. So they are basically started out as a company listing a network. So today they are a lot of different things. They have what is called Tmall, which is kind of Amazon-like. They have something that's called Taobao, that's an eBay-like service, and so on and so forth, payments. But where they really started was a service that was called Alibaba.com. And that was a service that basically connected Chinese suppliers with Western buyers. And that's what I'm going to focus on here for my kickoff. You can imagine it's kind of like a telephone directory. So you have a list of Chinese suppliers there, and what are the goods that they provide, and you have some kind of contact information. So a buyer would look up one of these suppliers, see that, oh, they are selling a very nice quality of rubber ducks. And out of bands, after having looked them up, they will basically make an agreement with the supplier. And what happens in this kind of setup from time to time is that it can be a little bit hard to prevent fraud. And this is what happened on February 2011. Actually, they had more than 2,000 cases of systematically organized fraud on the supplier side, people claiming to be suppliers of GPS watches or whatever it might be, and actually not really delivering once the customer had paid. And I think that's kind of an inherent weakness of the telephone directory model. In any case, what is Alibaba about? I think on the supplier or seller side, for a Chinese supplier, it's about getting access to market, to be able to sell to more buyers, and to sell more. And hopefully it's also about cutting away intermediaries, so sell directly to customers. And for buyers, it's about getting access to a bigger selection of suppliers, maybe more competitive prices. The same thing, maybe cut out some third parties that will take a significant cut of, or add a significant cost to what is sold, and so on. So in the big picture, connecting companies, that is really about removing some of the barriers, both for the buyers and the suppliers, and get companies into what is emerging as the digital supply chain today. But if we zoom out from Alibaba, because of course they have their interests in setting up this business, but in the big picture, 99% of all companies, they are micro, small, or medium-sized companies. If you look worldwide, there's 125 million registered companies, but there are many more that are not registered, but still legal companies. I saw a recent survey in India where they said it was a factor 17 unregistered companies compared to registered. In UK, the factor is a factor 1.1 or something like that. So there are, millions and millions of companies out there in the world which are not the large companies. And interestingly enough, it's mostly the large companies that are driving that have some level of connection to their supply chain. So if you look at the consumer space, you can see that anything social and network and connectedness and collaboration is very predominant. It's driving probably the majority of the internet traffic today, app sales and the whole economy. And some of these examples are Western, like LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. Some of the fairly big examples here are actually Asian or Chinese, like the Tencent chat. They are massive social networks that are just exploding at the moment. But if you want to inquire in the business-to-business world, what does connectivity look like there? We can look for a few indicators, in the absence of these kind of social networks for businesses. If you look at the volume of electronic invoicing between companies, today the total number of invoices that are exchanged is around 4 to 8%. 4 to 8% of all invoices. So that's not a lot, and that means the rest is exchanged, using paper, using emails and other unstructured formats. And the majority of the drivers here, they are really large companies like government and so on. But this doesn't really affect the 99% or more of all business in the company. They are simply not connected when they're doing trade. So if you look at the social graph, it's something like this, just bigger. If you look at the business graph, it really looks like this. There's no connectivity. So my claim is that the whole business-to-business space, in terms of social technology and connectedness, it's completely uncharted land. Of course, there are big commercial companies driving the whole internet economy and so on, but the companies themselves, they're fundamentally unconnected. So that was a long story, but back to APIs. And I'm going to kick it off with this quote, which is made by a man that I want to follow a little bit. He's called John Bosak. He's officially the father of XML, and he has been chairing the Oasis UBL committee. That's a separate topic. I'll get back to that. But in this quote, I think it was late 90s, he said, "Most of the world's business is, in fact, done by small companies. I want to enable a 5-person manufacturer of fabrics in Pakistan to bid on supplying 100 units out of a purchase request for million seat covers from General Motors. Seeing both parties to this transaction benefit equally is for me what this is all about." So I stumbled fairly late over this quote, but I think it's quite interesting that there is a direct connection from what brought about the whole XML or second generation web movement and the idea that everything that is about business to business and trade is fundamentally not a part of the internet in the same way that consumers are. So to follow John Bosak a little bit, he started kicking off the XML initiative in 96. Then he actually went on and joined an effort called EBXML, which was about standardizing common messages that are exchanged between companies, invoices, orders, remittance advices, these kind of things. He kicked off the Oasis UBL committee, and UBL stands for Universal Business Language. Also formalizing in XML as well most of the commonly used business messages. And finally, the state of today is in terms of business messages is UBL 2.1. But if you read about some of the vision behind XML, it was about making a data platform and vendor independent platform for interaction, to separate semantics from presentation, to create a responsive and interactive web and these kind of things. And And I think that UBL, is a logical extension of that vision, building on top of that vision of enabling companies all over the world to actually connect as easily as consumers today can connect using the World Wide Web. So diving a little bit into the example of the invoice. Let's assume that I want to make a service. I want to make it easy for companies to connect and just exchange orders and invoices. So I start by drafting an API. And my invoice is a super simple one. You need a sender and receiver, probably a total and a due date. When do I want to get paid? And that's probably the essential stuff. But thinking a bit further, there are also some legal requirements. You need an invoice number and international trade. You need some currency, maybe an attention point in the receiving company, and so on. And diving a little bit into it, the sender, there's some address info, and that's probably a little bit involved. And you want it to be structured, and the total probably should be broken up into the tax items. And there's globalization, so there are also all these crazy address formats, and they don't have postal codes in Ireland, except I think they just got postal codes. Congratulations. Tax rates, tax ID schemes. And then you probably want some extensibility because countries are being formed and you use different code lists in one country and another country and so on. So it quickly gets pretty complicated. And if I really want to exchange invoices, orders, and so on between companies globally, it's actually a little bit of a complex affair. So getting back to the whole UBL thing, it's an OASIS standard. It's chaired or was chaired by John Bosak. It formalizes 65 business document types and more than 2,000 business information items. It covers a whole lot of, let's say, international industry agnostic processes like tendering, quotation, buying, and so on. It's international and it has a very old soul. The picture to the left is 3,300 years old Sumerian clay tablet that is in fact an invoice and one of the earliest written records we have in the history of humanity. So UBL has a fairly old soul. It knows about these processes and how they are being done across the world. And just to show what it looks like in glorified XML, it's an invoice, it has an issue date, some notes, then comes the invoice lines and so on and so forth. So in a way, quite straightforward. But if you want to cater for all the use cases, it gets a little bit hairy. So getting back to Tradeshift and the company that I represent, we are today a network for 500,000 companies in more than 190 countries. And we are transacting more than $1 billion a month in these kind of documents. We offer financial services, we have an app framework, and of course we have an API. It's a RESTful API, and it's very much modeled around UBL and some of the semantics that the whole UBL set of documents expose. And then it's software as a service, so it's a giant cloud thingy, and there's continuous deployment, so versions all over the place. How it works, very, very simple. You can connect, if you're a very small supplier, you just sign up, you go to a website, you type in your invoice, and we convert it to UBL behind the covers. If you're a very large company, let's say Coca-Cola or Nike or something like that, you would just want to, fire hose it out of your ERP system, and then you talk directly with the API or some FTP or other legacy stuff that we put in front of the API. It gets into your, sender account in the shape of UBL. It gets transported to the buyer account. And then again, depending on if you're a very large buyer or if you're a very small buyer, you can choose different ways of consuming those invoices. And that's also one of the reasons I think from day one, we decided, we are a platform. The API is completely core to what we are doing because we have all these different target groups that just want to consume and produce business documents and interactions and so on in so crazily many ways that we cannot, start providing UIs or connectors for everything ourselves. So talking a little bit about the architecture, I'm not going to go into details, but we provide the REST interface. We drink our own dark champagne, and the front end only consumes the same API that we are exposing externally to third parties as well. And on top of that, there's an app framework that allows third parties to build apps, and also our own UI has been built using the same app framework that we expose to third parties. So the API is, as I mentioned, REST, very UBL flavored. OAuth 1, we are working on OAuth 2 support, but today it's OAuth 1. It supports both documents, transactions, events, relationships, resources, and so on. So I showed an example with an invoice, but it could as well be, the state of a workflow. Have my invoice been approved, or is it not approved? Has it been paid? Do we accept to pay it? And these kind of things. And very simple, resource-oriented. Here's an example of how to actually dispatch an invoice. So you put, you have the documents resource. You identify the document. For each document, there can be any number of dispatches. So you send it to some party. There you go. This is the first in the line of dispatches. And this is... now I'm maybe confusing things. Anyway, and this was supposed to be the connection ID that you dispatch this to. So imagine, like in Facebook, you have a connection to someone else, and this is how you identify a relationship where you want to send something. Looking at the web interface, because it might illustrate, every company that signs up has a profile page where they can write a little bit about themselves. So they have an account, and it's basically the account that you interact with the API. So everything you can do through the web UI, you can do through the API with the account. You have an activity stream, a little bit like Facebook, where you can see everything that happens, all the collaborations that you do. You can create invoices through the web UI. And just to again show some examples, if I want to get one of the invoices I created there, I could as well create it externally and put it there. But I will go to the documents resource. I will identify the document with a UID, and I can get it either in an XML format. So this will be the actual UBL that I talked about, or I can request a JSON-based equivalent, which is maybe more suitable for consuming in AJAX calls and these kind of things. Funny. So this is a list of example connections. Again, if I want to retrieve a connection and learn more about it, it's basically the same pattern. I go to the connections resource, and I get, again, in this example, a piece of XML that identifies, the connection and has some properties. Note that, UBL is really about business transactions, but there's a lot of spillover from UBL into some of the other resources because, we are talking about, let's say, the tax category of the company. When you list a company publicly, you might have tax identifiers or company identifiers. And, if you're on 190 companies, they have all kinds of crazy schemes. So, just representing the information about a company, it's a little bit the same to do it on a public profile page as it is to do it in an invoice. So there are some of the semantics from UBL that, that goes across all the different resources, even though they don't have anything to do with documents or transactions per se, but just to keep, a consistent semantics. So some design considerations and lessons learned from the stuff that we have been doing here. We wanted to focus on business-to-business, global reach, and interoperability, and that's one of the reasons why we have taken such a heavyweight animal as UBL. And the positive learning has definitely been that so far UBL has really covered all the use cases that we are catering for until today. But it also comes with a certain level of complexity. So if you want to just jump into and use our API, it's actually a little bit complex to get the hang of the semantics and the various nuances in that. So maybe, as we heard in some of the earlier talks, actually providing some good starter kits and clients and stuff like that might really help here. But we haven't gone very far along those lines. Many companies, we've also learned, prefer to stay in their comfort zone. So if they are high volume users of the API, they are not used to UBL. They want to use their good old comma-separated file. They've created elaborate structures. So along the way, we started adding integration and conversion services in front of the API as well for those who need that kind of service. Ajax, it's not nice to work with complex XML structures. It's also not very nice to work with very big and complex JSON structures. But that's one of the things we've kind of a land we've ended up in by using the whole UBL semantics, because that introduces a lot of complexity because it's international and huge. Another one I already mentioned, but that was a consistency among the different resources. So if we're using addresses, business identifiers, these kind of things across, some of the heavyweight UBL semantics tend to travel across these resources and embed itself in these other resources. So overall, it kind of increases the complexity of the API quite a bit. Yep. So getting back to where I started out, B2B and social tech, it's still very, we have 500,000 companies in the network. It's just a tiny fraction of all the companies in the world. It's still completely uncharted land. There's no connectivity. And I do believe that the whole social tech revolution will change that. But as I maybe also illustrated here, it is a different story for the business-to-business world, because there's a high level of complexity, because all the existing, historically rooted processes that companies take part in. So it's a more complex line, but we'll get there. Then there's a strong tie between the standards and the API. So well-defined semantics is the foundation of this. Process extensibility is really key. We can only ever be the best at a very tiny domain, in some very few specific geographies and maybe even some few industries. So I really believe we need to think this as a platform that can attract an ecosystem of third-party developers that can extend, use the API, create logistics applications, financial services applications, collaboration applications, and these kind of things, but that uses fundamentally the same network. So apps are key. I've not been talking very much about the app framework, but I think it's key to what we do. But of course, without an API, the app framework doesn't really make any sense. And I think that the future is really in the name of social tech plus business to business plus the ability for companies to make the data that until today have been locked up in the ERP systems, to make that liquid, use it, let it out there, so the third-party developers can find ways of monetizing on that data and give companies a return on that, just like Facebook and others have been doing. And I'm probably out of time, so I'm not going to go into this example. So let me just finish off and say there are some resources. You can always reach me on gts@tradeshift.com if you have questions or want to know more. The app framework is out there. We're working on version 2, so you can get access and try things out, but there will be very little support. Links. Help with the world of paper invoices. At the moment, we have a competition on Kaggle, which is a machine learning contest. We so far have a few hundred contestants. They have improved our own results in using machine learning to convert paper invoices to electronic invoices by almost or more than a factor 2 already. There's money to be won. So if you're curious, look in there. If for nothing else, it's very exciting to see all the very, very smart people and what they're doing in there. So that was my talk. Thanks for listening.